We often talk about discipline as if it is a personality trait. We say that some people have it and some people do not. We speak as though success belongs to those with stronger character, stronger willpower, or greater inner toughness. But that way of thinking is deeply unhelpful because it turns every struggle into a judgment. If a student does not revise, if they avoid difficult work, if they leave things until the last minute, or if they cannot seem to get organised, the usual conclusion is that they are lazy, weak, or lacking in self-control. That is the myth. The myth says discipline is a moral issue. The myth says that action depends on simply trying harder. The myth says that if a student is not doing what they should do, the problem sits inside them as some kind of flaw. But the reality is much more practical, much more useful, and much more hopeful than that. Discipline is not best understood as a moral battle. It is better understood as a mechanical system. It is something that can be adjusted, designed, improved, and engineered. A student failing to revise or tidy their room is not necessarily experiencing a lack of character. They may be experiencing a system error. Once we stop treating discipline as a mysterious personality trait, we can begin to understand how it actually works. Discipline is not a magical force. It is the mathematical outcome of a few core variables working together. In simple terms, discipline can be understood through an equation. It is produced when the subjective importance of a task combined with the psychological enjoyment attached to it outweighs the psychological cost of doing it. In other words, people act when the reason to act is strong enough, the process feels manageable or rewarding enough, and the cost of beginning does not feel overwhelming. This changes everything. It means discipline is not fixed. It means it rises and falls depending on conditions. It means that if action is not happening, we do not need to sit around blaming attitude in vague terms. We need to inspect the variables. Is the task important enough to the person doing it? Is there any satisfaction, progress, or enjoyment in the process? Is there too much friction, discomfort, confusion, or effort attached to beginning? These are practical questions, and practical questions give us practical solutions. Let us begin with the first variable, importance. This is the foundation. If something does not matter to a student, it is very difficult to sustain effort over time. Generic advice usually fails because it does not connect to anything meaningful. Telling a student that revision matters is not the same as helping them feel why it matters. If the goal remains abstract, distant, or imposed by somebody else, it has very little motivational force. But when the goal becomes personal, the whole system changes. Importance grows when the task connects to identity, aspiration, fear, pride, belonging, future security, or a deeply felt desire to avoid pain. That is why two students can be given exactly the same advice and respond in entirely different ways. For one student, the task may feel optional, distant, and emotionally flat. For another, it may feel urgent and personally relevant. The action is different because the meaning is different. This is why the why matters so much. The stronger the why, the stronger the leverage. If a student cares deeply about getting into a certain college, proving something to themselves, avoiding embarrassment, helping their family, securing their future, or escaping a life they do not want, then the importance variable becomes powerful. It starts to carry the task. Even when the task is unpleasant, action becomes more likely because the purpose behind it is strong enough to bear the weight. This is what the idea of the table on the slide is pointing towards. The visible behaviour, whether that is revision, organisation, exercise, or consistency, rests on a base. That base is purpose. If the foundation is weak, the structure above it becomes unstable. If the foundation is strong, the entire system is more resilient. There are moments in life where the why becomes so strong that behaviour executes almost automatically. A person may not enjoy the task at all, but they still do it because the consequence of not doing it matters too much. That is leverage. And once we understand that, we stop preaching vague motivation and start helping students build a reason that feels real. The next important insight is that not all motivation feels the same, even when it is effective. Some students are driven forwards by desire. They move towards a goal. They can picture success, achievement, pride, opportunity, or a future they want. This is the driven student. Their motivation has a positive valence. They are pulled forwards. Other students are moved by avoidance. They are not running towards something attractive so much as running away from something painful. They may be trying to avoid shame, failure, parental disappointment, the fear of falling behind, or the fear of proving a doubter right. This is the dragged student. Their motivation has a negative valence. They are pushed from behind rather than pulled from the front. But the key point is that both forms of motivation can be powerful. The system itself does not judge whether the fuel is noble, optimistic, fearful, or defensive. It simply reads the intensity of the input. If the motivational force is strong enough, it can still generate action. That matters because adults often make the mistake of assuming there is only one acceptable kind of motivation. In reality, many students work hard for complicated reasons. Some want success, some want relief, some want approval, some want to escape criticism, some want to prove that the story others have told about them is wrong. Instead of pretending all students are moved by the same thing, we should become better at diagnosing what is actually driving them. That is the purpose of the diagnostic matrix shown in the slides. It is not there to label one student as good and another as bad. It is there to help us identify the source of leverage. If you know what is fueling the student, you can build with it. If you ignore it, you are working blind. Now we come to the second variable, enjoyment. This part is often overlooked because people assume discipline and enjoyment are opposites. They imagine discipline means doing hard things with a grim face and enduring a miserable process, but that is too simplistic. The truth is that enjoyment can be engineered into the process, and when it is, discipline becomes easier. This does not mean every difficult task suddenly becomes thrilling. It means that small sources of reward can be deliberately woven into the experience. Human beings are more likely to repeat behaviour that brings some kind of psychological payoff. That payoff might be social, emotional, or neurological. It might come from a sense of progress, from ticking something off, from working alongside another person, from seeing improvement, from receiving recognition, or simply from breaking monotony. The slide refers to gamification and social dopamine. That is an important idea. If studying alone feels dead, repetitive, and emotionally flat, then the process can be changed. A student might revise with a friend, turn knowledge retrieval into a challenge, measure streaks, use visible tracking, or create immediate rewards for completion. None of that changes the content itself, but it changes the experience of doing it. It adds small bursts of satisfaction to a process that would otherwise feel barren. For some students, this matters enormously because one of the main reasons they avoid work is not that they do not care about the outcome, but that the process itself feels unbearable, lonely, dull, or emotionally draining. The slide also mentions the self-esteem payload. This is another powerful point. Difficult tasks can be framed as threats or they can be framed as opportunities to build personal pride. When a student completes something hard, especially something they initially doubted they could do, they often experience a rise in self-respect. They see themselves differently. They begin to think, perhaps I can do this. Perhaps I am more capable than I assumed. That feeling matters. Completion generates esteem, and esteem makes future action easier. This creates a loop. Small rewards make starting easier. Completion builds confidence. Greater confidence reduces resistance next time. The next start requires less friction. Over time, this loop can transform the student's relationship with effort. What once felt heavy begins to feel possible. What once felt like punishment begins to feel like proof of growth. This leads naturally into the idea of pain and trade-off. One of the most useful ways to understand discipline is to recognize that it is not a choice between pain and no pain. It is a choice between different kinds of pain. This is what the balancing scale on the slide is showing. On one side, there is the sharp temporary pain of effort. This is the discomfort of getting up early, beginning revision, facing confusion, staying consistent, saying no to distraction, or doing the thing you would rather avoid. It is unpleasant, but it is short-lived. On the other side, there is the dull, chronic pain of regret. This is the pain of underperformance, of missed opportunities, of poor grades, of knowing you could have done more, of carrying the consequences of inaction for much longer than the original task would have lasted. The sharp pain is immediate but brief. The dull pain is quieter at first, but it lingers. This distinction is extremely important for students because many of them are not choosing between comfort and discomfort at all. They are simply postponing discomfort into a form that will cost them more later. Discipline, then, is partly about helping students understand the true nature of the trade-off. When they willingly choose the micro pain of effort, they align themselves with their own long-term interests. They stop acting as servants of the immediate moment and start acting in service of their actual goals. This does not remove struggle, but it gives struggle meaning. It helps students see effort not as pointless suffering, but as an intelligent exchange. The third variable in the equation is psychological cost, sometimes described as friction. This is one of the most powerful parts of the model because it explains why people often fail to begin tasks they fully intend to do. Friction is everything that makes the start harder than it needs to be, and it includes clutter, distraction, confusion, inconvenience, lack of preparation, emotional resistance, overstimulation, and the general effort required just to get going. A task may be important. A student may even want the result, but if the start feels too costly, the system stalls. This is why students so often procrastinate over things they genuinely know they should do. It is not always because they do not care. Sometimes the activation energy is simply too high. That is what the friction dial represents. When friction rises, the effort to start rises with it. And crucially, these small sources of resistance are not trivial. A messy desk is not just a messy desk. A missing pen is not just a missing pen. A loud environment is not just a mild annoyance. A phone within reach is not just a background temptation. Each of these adds measurable cost to the act of beginning. The task starts to feel heavier before it has even started. High friction often means the effort of initiation outweighs the task itself. This is why some students spend more time circling work than doing it. The real struggle is not the task. The real struggle is getting over the threshold into action. The practical answer is to reduce friction aggressively. If something matters, it should not be hidden, buried, or difficult to access. It should be visible, ready, and simple to begin. The slide makes this point clearly. If you want to practice an instrument, it should not be shut away in a case at the back of a cupboard. It should be out, visible and easy to pick up. This is not laziness, it is design. Good systems remove barriers. They lower the cost of action. They create an environment in which doing the right thing is easier than avoiding it. That is why the example of preparation matters so much. Unpack the guitar case, clear the desk, end the pen's excuse, locate the charger. These small actions may look insignificant, but they remove entire chains of delay and avoidance. They matter because every extra step becomes an opportunity for the mind to back out. If a student has to search, tidy, find, decide, organise and negotiate with themselves before beginning, then the task becomes psychologically expensive. But if the environment has already been prepared, the start becomes much more likely. This is what highly effective people often do without even realising it. They reduce the number of decisions and obstacles between intention and action. The same logic applies to distraction. If a student tends to talk instead of work, or scroll instead of revise, or drift into something easier whenever boredom appears, then the environment itself must change. It is not enough to say, just ignore the distraction. If the distraction is readily available, then the system has been designed badly. In those cases, the option itself needs to be removed or made harder to access. Put the phone in another room, block the site, work in a different space, change the seating position, alter the routine. The point is not to prove heroic self-control. The point is to stop requiring so much of it. Environmental design beats repeated inner battles. This is where many popular time management methods go wrong. The slide makes a very sharp point about the scheduling illusion. People often believe that if they can just find the perfect timetable, the perfect planner, the perfect color-coded system, or the perfect app, then action will finally happen. But these tools are secondary. They are not useless, but they are not the engine. Discipline is the engine. A schedule is only as effective as the underlying equation that supports it. If importance is too low, if enjoyment is absent, or if friction is too high, then even the most elegant timetable will collapse. The issue is not that the schedule was not pretty enough. The issue is that the system beneath it was not functioning. That is why students can spend time making lists, timetables, and elaborate revision calendars without actually doing meaningful work. Planning can become a form of avoidance if it is not supported by real leverage and low friction action. The equation on the slide crashes into a negative number to make that point visually. If the cost outweighs the importance and enjoyment, the system fails. No amount of administrative neatness can compensate for that. This does not mean planning is pointless. It means planning only works when the deeper mechanics are in place. Once the equation is positive, scheduling becomes helpful. Before that, it can become an illusion of productivity. The application slide about the roulette table of time adds another useful layer. Every day, a student wakes up with a limited inventory of chips. Those chips represent time, energy, and attention. Once a chip is placed, it is spent. You cannot place the same hour twice. You cannot gamble. Time you do not have. This forces a confrontation with reality. Students often speak as if time is vague, elastic, or endlessly available in the future, but it is not. It is concrete, limited, and constantly being allocated, whether consciously or unconsciously. The point of the board is to make that visible. Fitness, difficult subjects, revision, and rest all compete for those chips. The student has to place them somewhere. This is valuable because it moves time and management out of the world of fantasy and into the world of trade-offs. Every yes is a no to something else. Every hour given to distraction is an hour removed from revision. Every decision carries an opportunity cost. The point is not to make students anxious, it is to make them strategic. Once they see time as a finite set of chips, they are more likely to allocate it deliberately instead of spending it accidentally. This also helps them understand that discipline is not merely about motivation in the abstract. It is about placing limited resources in ways that reflect genuine priorities. When all of these ideas come together, we arrive at the discipline operating system. This is the synthesis. The system works when the sliders are calibrated properly. Importance is clear, enjoyment is engineered into the process, friction is reduced. When that happens, action becomes far more natural. It may still require effort, but it no longer feels like an endless internal war. Students do not need to depend on bursts of inspiration or heroic willpower. They have built a structure that supports behaviour more consistently. In that sense, time management only becomes effortless once the underlying variables are set properly. First fix the equation, then the routine begins to work. And that brings us to the final message. Stop blaming willpower. Stop treating every failure to act as proof of laziness. Stop assuming that shouting louder at yourself or at a student will suddenly produce consistency. Instead, strengthen the underlying purpose. Make the reason real, personal, and emotionally meaningful. Engineer small joys into the process so that effort does not feel empty, and drastically reduce the effort required to begin. That means preparing the environment, removing distractions, simplifying the first step, and designing systems that support follow-through. The most important idea of all is this: you are not powerless in the face of motivation. You are not waiting for discipline to descend from the sky. You are not simply the victim of your habits. You are the engineer of your own mind. You can adjust the variables. You can solve the equation. You can place your chips with intention. And once you begin to think in that way, discipline stops being a mystery and starts becoming a design problem. That is far more practical, far more humane, and far more effective.